and welcome to the Asking Autistics podcast. I am your host, Lindsey Brains and Spoons, and today I am joined by Jocelyn. Jocelyn,
Hi.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, my name is Jocelyn. My platform is also, I'm known as AuDHD Academic. I mostly wanted to talk more about autism and educate about autism, as well as talk about my own experiences, because I did not see myself very well represented in autism spaces.
Absolutely. And Jocelyn has been talking about current events recently on her videos, and especially on TikTok. You've gone viral multiple places, which is like really exciting, but also overwhelming, as we've discussed.
Definitely.
So one of the big things that you've been talking about that, well, let's be honest, like it feels like the whole country is talking about, and we should be, is the the statements that have been made by the Secretary of Health and Human Services, RFK Jr., particularly his statements about autism. RFK Jr. said, and these kids who will never pay taxes, they'll never hold a job, they'll never play baseball, they'll never write a poem, they'll never go out on a date. Most of them will never use a toilet unassisted. And he said that in the context of saying that autism is an epidemic and that it is worse than COVID and that autistic people don't contribute to society.
He's said all of those things. The thing is, so a lot of autistic people have responded to this and are understandably upset. I also have to kind of preface this with the fact that I do not support or agree with RFK. But if you do watch the entire speech, he is primarily talking about people who have high and moderate support needs. So people who cannot do those things. And he does try to specify. It is very unclear in his speech, but he is specifying that is who he is talking about. But a lot of the stuff he says is still very incorrect and very offensive to a lot of autistic people.
Oh, definitely. I mean, and that's the biggest thing is I think many people's initial response to his statements was to say, I pay taxes or my kid plays sports, and they're trying to refute those claims, which is true. Many people in the autism community can do those things. And obviously it feels hurtful and insulting to be dismissed like that. And a lot of parents and kids when they're younger hear those things that oh, you're never going to be able to do anything. You're never going to amount to much, all of those things. And so there is a lot of frustration and pushback for saying that. At the same time, we have to recognize that a percentage of the autism community that is true, that folks have high support needs. They are not able to live independently. They are going to need services consistently for a lifetime. And there's nothing wrong with that.
There really isn't. Because my initial response to seeing the stuff that RFK did, when I saw the response before I saw the speech, but I saw everybody saying, I'm autistic and I can pay taxes, I'm autistic and I can work. And so my response, the video I made is hey, this isn't a helpful response to the autistic people who can't actually do those things. I got an overwhelming response to it, but it's just true. Yes, there are autistic people who can do this and there's autistic people who can't. It's a spectrum and you have to acknowledge both sides of it.
Exactly. And I think that's what a lot of us have been talking about for years now, is that there is such a thing as what's been referred to as Aspie superiority. It's something where there is almost a hierarchy within the community, or also how allistics, non-autistic people, they view the autism community, and they have also created this hierarchy that isn't really true. That we have differing support needs, we have differing abilities, but that doesn't make anybody better or worse than anybody else. And I think that is, unfortunately, a concept that for the lower support needs autistics, for high masking autistics, for autistic people who have had some success in the workplace or academia or things like that, they really struggle with including or embracing the rest of the community.
Yeah. I see this sort of thing a lot, where so many lower support needs and high masking autistics will say things like, oh, autism isn't a disability, or it's only a disability because of society, or we'll always talk about unmasking without really any consideration to there are autistic people who can't mask at all, or where it's not safe for them to unmask, and they don't realize that it's hey, there's still going to be autistic people who are disabled with or without society, and it's just not a great situation to be in, because we're all disabled, but it's not as simple as that for some other people.
Exactly. And I think it's important too for folks to realize that we can have different abilities and different presentations of autism within one family. And that's actually really common. And so I know I present in a similar way sometimes to some of my autistic family members. In my family, my partner met an older autistic family member of mine and was like, I get it now. I see like we have like a type, I guess, is that we are hyperverbal. So there's a lot of echolalia. There's a lot of vocal stimming going on. And the difference though between my older autistic relatives and myself is that I don't have a co-occurring intellectual disability. So I am able to mask more than they are, but we're still both autistic. And I think that's one of those things is that I have family members that fit those criteria, you know, who can't pay taxes, who don't have consistent employment, who don't play a number of sports or things like that. But at the same time, we have more in common as autistic people than we will ever have with allistic, non-autistic people.
Yeah, like I get that myself as well because I have like my older sister is autistic and a lot of my cousins in my family are also autistic and we are very different, but we still have like more in common than we do like differences. So it's like we both struggle in social situations. She knows how to mask her way through it. I really don't, but we both still struggle with social situations and making friends and maintaining relationships as well as just like understanding other people. But we struggle with those things in different ways.
Yeah. And so I think that's one of the things that we have to be cognizant about as we talk about that. Yes, RFK Jr. is very, very wrong about the autism and the idea that it's, you know, this contagious disease and that it needs to be eradicated or cured. Those kinds of things, that's eugenics language that he's been using. But at the same time, we have to be careful that we don't react in a way that's also ableist, that we don't try to refute him by like ending up putting down other people.
Yeah, because like I don't agree with the stuff that RFK said, but even then I can still understand the perspective of the people who agree with them because these are often like parents and relatives of people who have like sky high support needs and they're like, we need help, we need to know what is happening. These are people who are struggling and are desperate for answers that they're going to listen to this man when it's like they don't realize how wrong he is about a lot of things.
Yeah, I think that's part of it is people's desperation and their exhaustion means that anybody who sounds like they're supportive in any way, shape, or form, no matter if it's misinformation, you're going to cling to that. Right. And so because I'm on multiple platforms, especially like on Facebook, I joke around that I have a grandma army. I have all of these baby boomers who follow me and things. It starts with their grandkids a lot of times where they are like, my grandchild is autistic and what do we do? I want to learn more. And so as they've started researching and looking into things, they find, you know, autistic creators and they've started being like, oh, okay, that's what some of the terminology is. And what's been really interesting for me is I've had people of older generations who do believe those things or who came in with questions, because one of the things RFK has said recently is that it was 1 in 10,000 when he was younger, that autism didn't exist like this when he was younger. And why don't we see old people who are autistic? And the reality of that is diagnostic tools have gotten better and the criteria has been molded and has been researched more. And so when we talk about if people were growing up in the 50s, 60s, that we didn't have a lot of these diagnostic tools. And so, no, you didn't hear about people being autistic because at that time, honestly, they still thought autism was a form of schizophrenia and they weren't looking into things, because also something that we have had historically in this country is something called ugly laws. And ugly laws were put into place in many, many cities. Like, it's really kind of terrifying. But in the late 1800s, there were a lot of ugly laws put into place in cities across the US that essentially said that if you had a physical deformity or anything that made you look, and this is their words, not mine, but anything that would be disgusting to the public, that you would be imprisoned or fined for being out in public. And so these were laws that were very specific towards poor people and the disability community. And so if you were out even limping, if you were walking around limping, you could be arrested or you could be fined, because how dare you?
Yeah. On top of that, you have like all of the autistic people who had to be like institutionalized by their families. So it's like, yeah, you don't see a lot of autistic adults with, as he refers to it, full blown autism because a lot of them were like institutionalized and you do not see them in public that much. And it's been like that for a very long time.
In fact, his own aunt, Rosemary Kennedy, was institutionalized by her family for what they called like difficult and erratic behaviors. And what a lot of people now have speculated and have said is that it's highly likely she herself was autistic. And instead of being diagnosed and actually being accommodated back then, her father got her lobotomized, which made her disabilities worse and then institutionalized her. And she was hidden away from her family for most of her life. So no, he didn't even see his own autistic family member because they were institutionalized.
Yeah, it's like he really doesn't understand how far we've come since the original numbers, especially since the numbers that he's quoting are from the DSM-3 all the way to now, which is the DSM-5-TR. And it's like the autism spectrum got created between them. So like we went from infantile autism to autistic disorder to Asperger's, PDD-NOS to childhood degenerative disorder. And all of those got combined under the autism spectrum. And it's like, yeah, that's going to increase your numbers. And on top of that, when he's in his speech, whenever he talks about the rising rates of autism, he always says boys, never says girls. He always says that's this many boys are getting diagnosed. So many boys are getting diagnosed. So many boys are at risk, with little to no mention of autistic girls who are also getting diagnosed at very high rates right now. On top of that, even in his own information that he displays in his speech, saying that marginalized people and BIPOC people are also getting diagnosed significantly more than white children right now because they were also ignored and they were also dismissed for so long. So the combination of girls and BIPOC people and just the overall changes in diagnostics, absolutely there's going to be a significant change from the original diagnosis of infantile autism to what we now know as autism spectrum disorder.
Exactly. It's very similar to what happened when left-handedness was no longer punished and was no longer treated as a disability. So many years ago, left-handedness was considered, people thought it was of the devil, right? When they stopped forcing children to be right-handed, when they stopped punishing left-handed kids, the rates of left-handedness went through the roof. If you look at a chart over the years, rates of left-handedness skyrocketed. And it wasn't because, there's an epidemic of left-handedness. It was because left-handedness was no longer seen as something to be ashamed of or forced out of you. They simply allowed people to be left-handed. And we see that with autism now is it's more that it's no longer something to be ashamed of. It's something that we are better at researching. We're better at diagnosing, and we're seeing more of it. Yeah. Like you said, people that have been ignored for years are now being included in those numbers.
Exactly, because like a lot of people will try to combat with like, oh, but adults are getting diagnosed more. The numbers that he's talking about are specific to autistic children. But even if we're talking about autistic children, so many autistic kids who have more subtle presentations that wouldn't have been diagnosed years ago are being recognized now, are getting support now that when they wouldn't have before.
Yeah. And as someone who has worked in the disability community and in special education for over 20 years, I had students who were in special education, but they had a generalized diagnosis. Okay. It would just say something like they had generalized learning disabilities. Okay. They had what they would call like EBD, like they would have emotional behavioral disorders. And it was just these generalized things that now that student has been reclassified and is autistic, right? So autistic high support needs individuals have always existed as well. What he considers to be profound autism, RFK just wasn't in special education spaces, let's be honest. He doesn't have the health background, the scientific background to be in the position he's in, first of all. So no, you wouldn't have seen this stuff because you've been ignoring it most of your life. So
on top of that, I really don't think he understands how the autism spectrum works. Especially because he was talking about how he had never seen adults with full-blown autism, but he had seen adults with Asperger's. And I'm like, do you realize that that is also a part of the autism that you're talking about? That probably the majority of numbers that are now make the 1 in 31 are now low support needs autistics. Because I really don't think that autism is an epidemic. But I do think that that claim would make sense if you were specifically talking about the increase in high support needs. But you're not. You're talking about autistic people in general, and more people fall under that spectrum, and more people are getting diagnosed. And I really wouldn't call that an epidemic.
Even if, let's say, even if he was correct, which he is not, to be clear, he's very misinformed and wackadoo is the nicest way I can refer to him. But even if that was the case, the answer is more supports. The answer is stop cutting funding to disability services. Stop cutting all of our social programs. Stop getting rid of all of the scientists who were actually working on research into autism and things like that. That would be the answer to that, is that we need more supports. We need more funding for different types of therapies and things, because there's so many people, if you come from, support services community, where a lot of therapies, a lot of options aren't covered. There's no backing for those. There's no funding for that. The only thing that gets funded primarily is ABA. As someone who was went to school to get a master's degree in ABA before, I completely was disillusioned and was like, I cannot do this. I'm ethically opposed to this. There's so much that occupational therapy can do, and speech therapy, and to have AAC devices, to have alternative communication devices available.
Yeah, or even just like respite care on top of that. Because these parents are like exhausted and they're stressed. And I think that's like probably one of the worst things I've seen, because I feel like most people, if you've been in the autism community, you know about a lot of the animosity you see from autism parents compared to like low support needs autistics. And a lot of it I definitely think is like unnecessary. It's like, hey, we don't need to be fighting. We don't need to be arguing. But I think a lot of it is just a lot of like misplaced anger and resentment. Like, I think the saddest thing I talked was like this one autism mom creator who I very much do not like, because she has a lot of takes that I disagree with and I think are very hurtful. But it was a video talking about how she could not get support for her son, how there was an incident involving getting support for her son, and how she is tired, how she's exhausted, how she's depressed. And it's like, instead of being mad at the lack of services and what had happened, she decided to talk about how high masking and late diagnosed autistics aren't the same, how they don't get it, how she doesn't even consider them autistic anymore. And it's like, you should be mad at the lack of services. You should be mad at the system, not at us, who have nothing to do with that.
Yes. I mean, and that's the biggest thing is, I'm like, late diagnosed autistics, we're not receiving services either. Like, it's not that we're taking something from you. We don't have any supports. So it's one of those things where there's this opportunity where we should all be working together, right? To advocate and say, hey, give the autistic community more services, get Doge out of this, and like actually provide funding and supports to autistic people and to their families. But unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of infighting and people pitting themselves against each other instead of going after the real, villain in this scenario, which is, let's be honest, folks like RFK Jr. who are not helping us. They're just spreading misinformation.
So true. Yeah, I think it's just like, it's honestly like so sad, because sometimes it's like, okay, you're blatantly engaging in bad faith, but there's times where it's like, I can see your anger, I can see your frustration, I can see how you're struggling, but I don't think that you're mad at me, and I think you're either like misunderstanding or misinterpreting, because at no point would I ever try to compare myself to like a higher support needs autistics. I regularly advocate to make sure that those with higher support needs are included in the conversation. But I also think that low support needs still have a place here. And it's not a matter of like fighting over who's more disabled or who's less disabled. Like, we're all autistic. We're all disabled. We all need support. It might not look the same, but it is needed for everyone.
Right? It's not a contest. We really should be banding together and supporting each other. And unfortunately, we're not seeing enough of that. I think also this, I feel, segues into some other current event things that we've unfortunately been dealing with in the autism community is there aren't supports. There's also a lack of training for law enforcement and for people across the country, where we've been seeing this for years, but I mean, recently, like this year, we've experienced some really terrible interactions between law enforcement and the autistic people.
Yes, because if anybody doesn't know, most recently, a 17-year-old autistic boy who was nonverbal and had cerebral palsy, he was Latino, was shot 9 times by police, lost his leg, and unfortunately died because he was brain dead after this encounter. And it's terrible because it's honestly gotten to the point where it's like the entirety of the police, the entire system is built on racist institutions. It is built against people of color. It is built against disabled people. And it's gotten to the point where, like, yes, more training is needed, but it's honestly to the point where the whole system needs to be reworked. The whole system needs to be redone because no amount of training can change the amount of like racism and ableism that is ingrained into that system.
Absolutely. And I have here, the Police Brutality Center has a statement that says that individuals with disabilities may walk, move, speak, or behave differently from what law enforcement officers would deem as normal. Rather than considering a disability, they assume individuals are intoxicated or uncooperative. Disabled individuals make up half of violent police encounters. And that is just really scary, not just as a theoretical concept of seeing this happen in Black and brown communities, in the disability community, but it's something where I think both of us have family members and definitely have friends and things where this is a very real fear. Like this is something that we have to deal with on a regular basis.
So many people do not realize like just how bad it is. Because like I actually like took the opportunity to talk about it. So many people in the autism community talk about masking and unmasking, and I had to make the point that it is not safe for every autistic person to unmask. Like, I'm a low masking autistic person, but I know that if I were in a situation where I had to deal with the police or any other kind of like authority, I know I can like be in control of myself and I'm not going to stam. I'm going to make the facial expressions I need to. I'm going to respond the way that I need to because I know it would be dangerous otherwise. And so many people do not realize that being able to unmask safely is a privilege because it can literally mean the difference between life and death, especially when encountering the police as a disabled person, let alone a brown disabled person.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's one of those things where on one hand, like I personally don't care about puzzle pieces and imagery, but I know there are people in the autism community who have had really bad experiences with it. Okay. They see it as harmful and that's perfectly fine. Like I respect that. Okay. Like I agree with them to a certain extent. At the same time, if I am taking certain friends or family members, if we're going someplace and I encourage them to wear big old puzzle piece sweatshirts, whatever it takes, because I've been there when security's been called on them. I've been there when, people are calling the police and they don't move in the ways that law enforcement, considers normal. And so, yeah, like it's very scary. And I am in a very privileged place that I am a middle-aged white lady. So people will more than likely listen to me. And when I step in and say, hey, they're disabled, they are autistic, I need you to please calm down. Please do not call the police. Like I have got this because I've been in those situations and it's very scary.
Yeah, because so many people are like fighting over the puzzle piece, especially because like it's Autism like Awareness Month. But it's like you have to realize that so many autistic people rely on the puzzle piece because it is like the universal recognition of autism. Most people are not going to understand if they have like the rainbow infinity symbol on them. But if they have a puzzle piece, you can understand, oh, they're autistic. I can kind of like work with that information now. So many people rely on it to like just be safe, for people to recognize they have disability, to be identified in an emergency. It's really like also like the puzzle piece thing. It's just like, it's honestly so nonsensical because people don't realize, in the same way that people don't realize masking is a privilege, people don't realize that like, hey, people need this for their safety.
Yeah. I mean, and would I love us as a society to be past this and to have everybody be aware of the realities of autism? Yeah. But the fact is that outside of these online little spaces and bubbles, people are not. People know either misinformation or barely any information. And so we've got to work with the public, we've got to work with the tools we have because it is dangerous, because police are shooting and are violently taking down people with disabilities. And that is a very real fear. So we have Victor Perez, who sadly was shot and killed by police recently. There's also been incidents in Tennessee and Texas and Florida where autistic people have been arrested, have had the police called on them in public because, again, they are not moving or talking or looking the way that people think is normal. And people, instead of assuming disability, they assume
dangerous.
nefariousness.
People like literally being disabled in public is dangerous. It is dangerous to be disabled in public, especially if you are visibly disabled in any way, because people are more likely to assume that you are dangerous or that something is wrong than, oh, you have a disability. And then once again, that's like twice as dangerous for people of color, where it's like, oh, we're already assumed dangerous on like a normal day, but then it's like, oh, we're autistic in public, just like we're stimming and people think that something is wrong. People think that we're going to do something when it's not that simple. And it's honestly such like a terrible system that this happens so often. And what's even worse is when it happens in situations of distress, because so many people already try so hard to control themselves. Like, I have seen like Black creators talk about like, oh, I don't feel like I can stim in public because because people will see me as a threat. But I've also seen it where it's like people begging parents, do not call the police on your children if they're having a meltdown. Meltdowns are very complicated and they can escalate to that point. But your child, especially a disabled child, and especially if you have a like Black or brown disabled child, police are significantly more likely to shoot first and ask questions later. Even if they explain that this person is autistic, this person is disabled, and they are in distress, they are very likely to get shot or harmed in some way, even when people are trying to explain it.
Yep. I mean, we just saw this with the police shooting. He was in his yard behind a fence, and neighbors called the police on him for erratic behavior because, again, he's autistic. He was having a meltdown.
Yeah, and he had like cerebral palsy, so people were saying like, oh, he was stumbling over himself. They assumed that he like might be drunk or under the influence.
Yeah.
It's like, no, he's disabled. And they were trying to help, but like the police didn't even de-escalate. They got there and immediately decided to start shooting.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, this is becoming so common. And so it's one of those things where we have to just be aware that, like, do not call the police on autistic people. Do not call the police because it's going to do more harm than good. And I think if you have autistic family members, if you have disabled community members, calling the police is not going to de-escalate the situation. Call paramedics. Call a social worker.
Yeah, there's actually like a really good research called Don't Call the Police, specifically for like disabled individuals, where it's like there are other ways to get help or de-escalate situations without like calling the police. So if you were to like go to that website, you would be able to find like resources that would help you without calling the police and escalating it to that extent.
What's this called again?
Don't Call the Police. So I think it's like a website.
Don't Call the Police.
So that's like a really good resource that definitely could help like de-escalate or find resources for those situations without having to call it.
Absolutely. I mean, according to the Ohio Disability Policy Center, it says that 30 to 50% of people subjected to police use of force are people with disabilities, and a third to half of people killed by police are people with disabilities.
It's so common.
Mm-hmm.
And it's awful that it has to be this common.
Yeah. And so I think the biggest takeaway, don't call the police.
Very much. Like, honestly, like the system needs to be changed, like entirely. Like the system needs to be torn down and built from the ground up because it's so ingrained in how they're trained. It's just so deep. It's literally in the roots of it that to be racist, to be ableist, to assume that these people are dangerous, to shoot first, ask questions later. And it's not a problem that can really be fixed by just a better training. It's going to keep happening until the system changes entirely.
Absolutely. And I think people have a misconception. They hear us say like defund the police and they're like, well, then who's going to help with anything? And I'm like, well, first of all, as we've seen statistically, like the police don't help de-escalate situations. And so you can take away funding. We need more crisis counselors. We need social workers. We need medical interventions and mental health professionals. Like these are all people who could be helping in these scenarios, that we could have departments and funding for this kind of thing. But instead, we've got essentially a law enforcement gang that goes after marginalized communities with violence.
Yeah, the system is broken and it's at a point where it cannot be fixed. It needs to be redone.
Yeah. And unfortunately, this current administration is not going to be doing that at all. They're going to be doubling down on misinformation, as we've seen. And I think going back to RFK Jr.'s statements, I think if you know about the history of disability and policies, and like we mentioned, the ugly laws, we mentioned institutionalization and things like that, the language he's using is eugenics language. And the concern with that is that especially when he mentions the paying taxes part and the
Yeah, being able to hold down a job, mentioning that these, like, yeah, like literally he says that autism is affecting these children at the beginning of their productivity and that they should be contributing to society. Those words alone should really tell you what he cares about. It's not about getting your children help or treatment or support. It's about getting more people to contribute to society.
exactly. And I think that if you put that together with the fact that over 15 states have been trying to get rid of IEPs and 504 plans right now, and you see the programs that have been defunded by Doge and things like that. There's a pattern here with the language being used, with the policies being enacted, with the supports being taken away. What we're seeing is disability is now being considered not productive, and therefore they don't want to help. That's a sense.
Yeah,
They
like
don't
they
want to.
don't want, like, yeah, they're taking away these kids like access to education because like having that IEP, having those accommodations makes education accessible. Even for me, I would not be able to be successful in college without my accommodations. And I know these kids, and it's like nowhere near the amount that these kids need their accommodations. And you want to get rid of autistic people, and it's like you don't understand like how bad this is, especially when he's talking about paying taxes and working. It's not about your kids struggling. It's about them not contributing.
I don't want to say they're code words, but they are. It's dog whistles essentially. So like if you know, you know, this is setting precedent. The things he's saying and these things they're doing behind the scenes, all of that is leading up to getting rid of or criminalizing or institutionalizing the disability community, particularly the autism community. They do not want to help your children. They want to get rid of them.
Because if he really did care, there are so many other words he could have said. He could have talked about these people who cannot access education, who cannot be independent, like at all. He could talk about the struggles of these kids, of their families, of the increasing amount of autistic children who are eloping and their bodies are being found. He could talk about the actual issues, but no, he talks about taxes. He talks about working. He talks about productivity, not about the real issues facing autistic people and their families, because that is what matters. If he cared, he'd talk about what matters. He'd talk about treatment. He'd talk about support, because that is what is needed right now.
Yeah. And they'd be getting rid of Doge and instead funding programs to provide supports to autistic people and families. They're not. They are setting up a narrative that says this is a disease, it's an epidemic, we need to stop it, we need to get rid of it. That's the narrative that they're setting up, and that's dangerous, and it should terrify you. If you are a parent of an autistic person, this should terrify you. He's not
On
here
top
to
of that,
help
like,
you.
he really isn't. And on top of that, it's just like the parents who agree with him talk about, we need a cure. And I can once again understand where they're coming from. They are stressed, they're tired, their child is struggling. I understand where they're coming from.
We
So
have
it's
empathy
like,
for them.
exactly. So it's like, I understand that you are stressed and that you are tired and you want a cure, but autism has everything to do with how your child's brain is wired. This is how they are made. That you can't change that. The odds of them being able to find a cure for autism are extremely low, because being able to change the entire way a person's brain works, I just don't think that's ever going to be possible. Treatment, however, to like help those issues and to help them better communicate and to better adapt to the world would definitely be helpful, but I don't think he's going to cure autism. And he's not getting you more supports, which is really what these parents need.
Exactly. And so we're just seeing, again, with all of these different things, just in the last few weeks, we're going down a road that's very scary. And we're going backwards. We made progress over the years, and we're going to go back in time, and it's not going to be good.
100%. We're like absolutely going backwards, especially with the research that he's trying to push. Because in his speech, he was very blatant, like, oh, changing diagnostics and better recognition are not the reason for this epidemic. And it's like, no, I don't think he realizes the amount of people that now fall under the autism spectrum and how things have changed, because he's going all the way back to the beginning. And then on top of that, he starts saying that genes don't cause epidemics. Genes can provide a vulnerability, but they don't cause epidemics. And it's like, do you also, like, autism is so genetic. Autistic people are getting married. Autistic people are having children, and they're having autistic children. And if you have an autistic child, your next child is also more likely to be autistic. Like, autism has a very solid genetic component that people know about, and he's just throwing that out the window. And he's saying it's an environmental toxin. And he keeps talking about this environmental toxin with no research, no citations to back it up. Not only that, he like goes out of his way to say someone is like putting this environmental toxin out there and they're making money off of it and they're profiting off of it. And it's like, where is your evidence? Where is your proof? You're just fear mongering at this point. Like, these parents are already stressed. They're already tired and they're already scared. And now you're telling them that there are other causes to autism. You're just throwing things out there with nothing to back it up.
Here's the biggest thing is like you said, there's decades of research that has shown that autism is primarily genetic. There's only one study. It was a falsified grift that said autism is caused by vaccines. Okay. That is not true, but it's a conspiracy theory. The doctor who he falsified his data, he lied, had his medical license revoked. He's a scammer. It's awful. But RFK Jr., who is a known conspiracy theorist, you guys, he has bought into the anti-vaccine conspiracy theories so hard. And so that's what he's pushing. He wants it to be this. So when he says, I'm going to study this and we'll get the reason for autism in September, the only way, by the way, if you know anything about scientific research, the only way you could say, oh, we'll have an answer in a few months is if you already have a BS answer. Like, this is not how the scientific process works. It means he's just going to do what Andrew Wakefield did, who, by the way, he's connected to. Of course he is. Who's the conspiracy theory grifter who came up with the whole hoax about vaccines. And so he's just trying to bring up that whole conspiracy theory again. That's all he's doing here. When we have decades of research that has shown that autism is primarily genetic. And I know how hard it is, though, for some parents to hear that your child's disability is genetic, which means it comes from you. And I think that's what some of these parents are fighting so hard. They want it to be an environmental factor. They desperately want to say, I had nothing to do with this. My family tree has nothing to do with autism. And I think that's internalized ableism, and there's stuff going on there. And like, I sympathize for them because I could see how hard that would be to feel like they were blaming themselves. But instead, again, of being in that mindset, it's like, focus on your child and fight for the types of supports that they need. Right?
That's very true. Cause like, I've seen so many parents within like the last week talking about like, is it so wrong to want to know the cause? Is it so wrong to want to know the reason? Is it like so wrong to want to help? And it's like, the odds are that whatever research does come out, especially from RFK, is going to be biased towards his opinion. The odds are of getting an actual genuine answer, if there is one, is that it's going to be biased. I thought that he does not help when he says that we are doing this to our children, because how many parents are desperately like, did I do this to my kid? What happened? What did I do? What mistakes did I make? This is a process that so many parents go through when they have a disabled child, like wondering if they did like what, or if they did anything wrong, when it's like, there's nothing you could have done. This is what happened. And him trying to place blame, saying it's our fault, saying that we did this to our children, is not helpful to anyone. And it's just contributing to those anxieties. It's contributing to those fears. And it's just making things worse.
Absolutely. And again, it's like all of these scientists who, by the way, they've gutted the CDC, they've gutted NIH. Like, so you've got all of these scientists who have spent a lifetime researching autism, and he's throwing out all of their work, all of the studies that actually have had decades of research behind them and meaning. So he's throwing all that out for a conspiracy theory, and that is abominable.
Honestly, like, it's so obvious how, like, based on the words he's using, especially with like the work and the taxes, how little he cares. Another thing that he also like brought up was how, like, in a couple of years, if the economic cost of autism is going to be in the trillions. And it's like, when you say stuff like that, along with like the productivity and contributing to society, it is so obvious you don't really care about these kids, about their parents who are like tired and exhausted and are struggling. It should be about resources, not about how much it's going to cost you or about what they can or can't do for society. These people have worth. Just because they can't work or they can't pay taxes, it doesn't make them any less worthy of living. They still have value as human beings. They are still loved and cared about. So to say that really just shows how little he cares about it.
I think that is the key point, is that paying taxes or having a full-time job does not determine your value. Your humanity is what makes you valuable and important to the rest of us. And that's the key here. Well, thank you so much for talking about all this. It's a very upsetting conversation to have, but it's something that we need to be talking about.
Yeah.
In the autism community. If people want to find out more about you or see your work, where can they go?
You can find me on Threads, Instagram, or TikTok, all at AuDHD Academic. So I am on all these platforms. I make posts pretty regularly about all sorts of things, both about issues in the autism community, about my own experiences. So you can definitely check me out on there if you're interested in seeing any of that.
I highly recommend going and finding Jocelyn, all those places. So thank you so much. And I am, again, Lindsey Brains and Spoons everywhere. And you can find the podcast Asking Autistics on all platforms, including YouTube, where you'll see our beautiful faces chatting.
Thank you so much.
Yes. If you have any questions, concerns, stories about ways that you've dealt with disability in the community, feel free to put it in the comments and like and subscribe, hit all the buttons, and we'll see you next time. Bye.